welcome to the deep dive.
Good to be here.
So today we're zeroing in on, well, what looks like a potential sweet spot for Canadian homeowners.
Uh-huh. Especially if they're maybe thinking about selling and perhaps moving south to the U.S.
Exactly. We're looking at two big things playing together here. The current Canada-US dollar exchange rate
Always a big factor in cross-border moves.
and Canadian tax rules.
Our mission, if you will, is to sort of unpack why now could be a particularly interesting time for this specific kind of transaction.
Yeah, it's quite a fascinating alignment. You've got currency and tax policy sort of meeting.
So let's start with the currency. What are we seeing right now?
Well, roughly speaking, as of now, May 2025, one Canadian dollar gets you about 70 US cents.
Okay, 70 cents on the dollar. What does that mean practically for someone selling, say, a Canadian home?
It means your Canadian dollars buy more US dollars when you convert. Let's take an example. A $1 million Canadian home sale
Okay.
could translate roughly into about $700,000 USD.
Wow, okay. That's a
Yeah.
significant number. It is. And what really stands out is how much further that Canadian equity, the value locked in your home, can potentially stretch in U.S. markets compared to maybe just a few years ago.
Right, so that conversion power, it's really quite potent. You could be looking at maybe a more comfortable retirement setup down south.
For investing, perhaps?
Yeah, maybe dipping into the Florida real estate market, which we know is popular, or just, having more financial breathing room with those US dollars.
It's fundamentally about your Canadian home equity potentially unlocking more value stateside right now, more than it has in quite some time.
Okay, so that's the currency advantage. But you mentioned tax policy.
Yes, and this is where it gets even more interesting for homeowners. We need to talk about Canada's capital gains tax rules.
Right, the tax you pay on profit from selling an asset.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the key thing here for many, many homeowners is something called the Principal Residence Exemption, or PRE.
Ah, yes, the PRE. That's huge, isn't it?
It can be. If the property you're selling has genuinely been your main home, your principal residence.
You might not owe any Canadian capital gains tax on the profit you make from the sale. Zero.
That is a massive potential boost right there. But what if it wasn't your main home? Say, a rental property or an investment?
Good question. Even then, the Canadian system has a feature that could still be advantageous in this scenario. Only half 50% of the capital gain, the profit, is actually added to your income to be taxed.
Okay, so only half the profit is taxable. That's the inclusion rate.
That's the term, yes. The 50% inclusion rate. Now, the actual tax you pay on that 50% depends on your personal income tax bracket, your marginal rate.
So if you combine that potentially lower tax hit in Canada, especially with the PRE, with the favorable exchange rate.
Exactly. You could end up holding significantly more US dollars after you sell, pay any applicable Canadian tax, and then convert the proceeds.
Seems like a powerful combination.
It really is. If we step back and look at the whole picture, Canadians selling right now could potentially benefit twice. First, from getting more US dollars for their Canadian property due to the exchange rate. And second, from possibly minimizing or even eliminating their Canadian tax hit, particularly if it's their principal residence.
So it's this confluence, this meeting of the strong Canadian dollar versus the U.S. dollar, favorable tax rules, and you also hear about growing demand in warmer U.S. spots.
Like Florida, yeah.
Yeah.
It creates a pretty compelling narrative for why now.
Makes sense. Now, thinking practically for Canadians who might be hearing this and thinking, okay, this sounds interesting, maybe it applies to me. Taking that leap, it involves navigating two different systems.
Absolutely. It's not trivial.
We did come across a resource that might be helpful here. Michael Graf of the Graf Group VIP. They're with Coldwell Banker in Sarasota.
Ah, okay.
Apparently, he specializes in exactly this, helping Canadians who are looking to, relocate, invest, or retire in the U.S., and seems to have a real focus on Florida.
And having someone who understands the nuances of both sides of the border is, well, incredibly valuable in these situations.
How so? Well, think about it. Someone experienced with Canadian sellers and the U.S. market, particularly a specific market like Florida, can offer, tailored strategies.
Strategies for what, exactly?
For selling effectively in Canada, for negotiating the purchase in the U.S., understanding market differences.
Yeah.
Plus, they often have a network.
Network, you mean like lawyers, accountants?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Legal and financial professionals who are familiar with cross-border issues, both Canadian and U.S. regulations. That kind of integrated support can be, frankly, crucial.
Yeah, I can see that. especially navigating different tax laws, real estate practices.
Right. And it doesn't matter if you're just sort of kicking the tires on the idea or if you're already packing boxes, having that expertise can make a huge difference.
Okay, so let's try and crystallize the main takeaway here.
Go for it.
It seems to be this. The current strength of the Canadian dollar relative to the U.S. dollar, when you combine it with Canada's specific rules on taxing capital gains from property sales, especially that powerful principal residence exemption.
Well, it could genuinely represent a notable financial opportunity, a window, perhaps, for Canadian homeowners thinking about a move to the States.
I think that sums it up well.
Yeah.
And it really leads to a key thought, maybe, for you listening.
What's that?
If that idea of a cross-border move, maybe trading Canadian winters for sunnier skies down south, has ever crossed your mind,
Yeah.
now might just be a really opportune moment to, seriously explore how these specific factors, the exchange rate, the tax rules, could actually work to your advantage.
So it's worth asking yourself, could this unique alignment of economic conditions actually help turn those maybe long-term thoughts or plans into a near-term reality?
Exactly. It's definitely something to consider.